Hi, I'm Sombra Wilson. Um, Many years ago, when I was a brand new believer, like a brand new believer, would have been probably within about 3 or 4 months of becoming a believer. Um, my husband and I faced a situation where I was pregnant and expecting our second child, and he was a student. And well, actually, he wasn't even a student at the time. He was an out of work dad, and he had just finished his undergrad, but there was no jobs. 1982, 1983, there was a recession and there was no jobs available. And so um, here I was pregnant again with my second child, and um, quite scary because the idea of having a second child so close to the first, they were born 18 months apart. Um, and my husband not having a job and me having to be the working person, I was already overstressed in my pregnancy. And I went to work one day, and on my way home from work, I stopped to pick up my Amway order from my friend's house. And my friend's husband said to me, you know, if Stuart doesn't get a job, you're going to be back to work 6 weeks after this baby is born. And I know in the United States, 6 weeks is kind of normal, but in Canada at the time, we had 6 months. We may even have had a year at that point. Anyhow, I cried all the way home, and the closer I got to home, the more I cried. And and it was hard to get home. And then when my husband came home, I was crying even more, and it was miserable. And then the next day we had I had a doctor's appointment for the pregnancy. And then as my husband took me to work, I cried even more. And eventually he just took me straight home because there was no way I was going to be able to work with those tears. So that evening we had a wedding rehearsal for some friends of ours. And the pastor, the pastor's wife noticed that I was crying, and she said, let's have a meeting after the wedding rehearsal. So we end up in the pastor's office, and um, pastor asked Stuart, what's wrong? And he said, I don't know. And he says, but it's your responsibility to know. I married you a few months ago, and you said you'd take care of her. So he says, you need to ask her what's wrong. So he asked me what's wrong. And it's like, oh, I'm going to have another baby, and I don't want to have this baby because we can't afford it. Anyhow, the tears were flowing. I was stressed out. And so the pastor said, turned to Stuart, and he says, do you understand that your wife is under a lot of stress? And you need to figure out this problem. You need to find a job. You need to find a solution to the problem. And so we ended up in counseling. And because we ended up in counseling, wasn't so much me in counseling, it was Stuart in counseling. He counseled with a different pastor, but they ended up with a solution that he was going to go back to school. And he was going to go to school, and he was going to get his master's, and he was going to get his PhD, and then he would be able to provide for the family. And so I had to wait. That wasn't an immediate solution. That wasn't, a solution by the time I was going to have this baby. This was a solution, a long-term solution. And so I did have that baby, and that baby went to daycare. But in the meantime, Stuart managed to find us subsidized housing, and he found us subsidized daycare, and he got loan and bursary for school, and he did his master's degree. And then he got a fellowship to go to Queens, and he did his PhD over 4 years. And so 6 years later, he finally was the one able to support the family. But really, it didn't really take 6 years, because along the way, there were little things he did. One thing he did was he became a guinea pig at a drug testing company. And he, like I said, he found the subsidized housing and the subsidized daycare and the loan and bursaries. And so what I realized during all this time, and right at that moment when we were in the pastor's office, and from that time on, I started praying that my husband would always know that we were in his, we were always in his ballpark, you know, we were always in his corner. We were always there supporting him, and that I would follow him and do whatever it took to be a team with him. I wanted him to know that we would always love him. And I wanted him to know that we were his cheerleaders. And so what did God do in me at that time? He took away that urgency. He took away the fear. He took away the stress of feeling like I was alone. And he gave me hope for the future. And he gave me hope in knowing that I wasn't doing this alone. Like I have this husband who's my partner, and my husband and I are going to work together, but we have to work together. If I had spent years complaining, there's not enough money, you have to go get a job, you know, if I had complained about the answer, the solution to a problem, that wouldn't have solved our problem. That would have perpetuated our problem. And so learning to support him in prayer, learning to be his cheerleader, learning to recognize that we are a team and that the team needs to work together. And so, yes, I had that baby. My 2 children went to daycare, and I continued working for another 2 years until I got pregnant again. And by the time that 3rd baby was born, we were ready to move on to a PhD at Queen's, and we were able to buy a house. And, you know, it wasn't a luxurious house, but it was an adequate house. It was we were happy and we were safe and we were comfortable in our home, even though it was a low-income neighborhood. And we knew that wasn't the end goal. The end goal was to get here. And I have absolutely bloomed here. I absolutely love my home. I love the place where I live. My husband loves his job. My husband's working down the other end of the house because he was able to find a job, a career, a lifestyle where we could be together. So while she waits, while you wait, you have to be praying while you wait, and you have to be trusting while you wait, and you have to be looking for the little golden nuggets, the little lights at the end of the tunnel, and you have to just hold on to those and know that the victory is coming. And so then there was another period of time when I had to wait, and that period of time was between my 3rd child and my 4th child. And after my 3rd child was born, and we had just come through this period of my husband being a student. Well, we were students. And again, I was crying because I was overwhelmed with 3 babies and no longer being a working mom. And I was suddenly a full-time stay-at-home mom. And so we shut the door on more children. We had a vasectomy. And from the moment we had the vasectomy, I cried. I did not want to not have any more children. And I begged for more children. And I cried and I whined and I complained. And then about 6 years later, a friend of mine suggested to me, why don't you do prayer walking? And so I took her up on that suggestion, and I started praying the prayer of Jabez. And the prayer of Jabez is basically increase my dominion, increase the things that I'm responsible for, and that God would bless me. And so every morning I'd get up and I'd walk down the road, and I didn't always walk far. It wasn't about exercising. It was just about getting into my alone space. And by getting into my alone space out there on the road, I could talk to Jehovah and I could be in his presence. And I started by that rote prayer of praying the prayer of Jabez. And then it would sort of morph itself into the things that I was hoping for, the things that I was wishing for. I wanted more children. I wanted to be pregnant again. I wanted to increase the blessing of my family, to increase the blessing of, the domain that I was responsible for in my household. And so it took a good year. And then one day, maybe not a year, I think it was maybe 6 months of prayer walking. And then one day my husband put his hand on my belly and he said, wouldn't it be nice to have another baby? And he was joking. And I said, yes, let's pray about it. And then he was terrified because he was joking. Anyhow, we prayed about it. And then we went to the doctor, and the doctor said it'll be um, $3,000 to $4,000, and it'll be a 3 or 4 year wait. And we left there and we cried. And get out. And then we waited a year, and we still hadn't heard from the urologist to even get an appointment. And a friend of mine said, go and ask again. So we went back to the doctor and we asked for a doctor in a different city. And within 30 days, we had an appointment. And 41 days from there, um, we had the surgical date, and it was only $1,500. And 6 months later, I got pregnant, and I lost that baby 12 and a half weeks in. And then 3 months later, I got pregnant again. And thus began the journey of having more children. I have 4 more children since then, and I've been pregnant. I've been pregnant a total of 18 times. I have 7 total children. Um, but that waiting process between, when we stopped having children and when we started having children again, it was really hard because I spent so much time complaining and whining and crying every month. Every month I'd get my cycle and I would cry. And I would complain to him that I wanted more children. And it wasn't getting me anywhere. It was just causing frustration in the marriage. And this friend who told me to go pray, what a blessing it was to be told to go pray, because when you complain to God, he's the only one that can do anything about it. And it wasn't me that did anything to change my husband's heart. It was Jehovah who changed my husband's heart. And my husband's heart wasn't changed in that he wanted more children. It was just, he wanted me to be happy. He wanted me to be fulfilled. And he loves our children. Of course, he loves our children. uh, but it's been a lot more hard work. My youngest is 9. My oldest is 28. I've had children, over 20 years. I have homeschooled. I've currently been a homeschooler for 25 years. I've got another, you know, 8 years left of homeschooling to do. It's a long journey, but oh, it's so full of blessings. It's so full of happiness and joy and hard work. And let me just remind you, nothing comes easily in life that's of any value. If it's easy, you can dispense of it easily as well. So when you're doing the hard work, rejoice in the fact that you're doing the hard work, because hard work has value. Hard work is worth the effort because, well, because it's so worth the effort. But if it came easy, you could easily dispense of it. You wouldn't value it at all. Anyhow, thank you for sharing this time with me, and I hope it's been a blessing to you. I hope what you take from this is that while you're waiting, spend the time in prayer. Spend the time developing your relationship, your intimate relationship with Jehovah, and learning to trust Him, and learning to be patient, and learning to open your hands and be satisfied with what He brings. In the name of Yeshua HaMashiach, Amen.
Is that Charlie Brown?